It is just coming up to 26 minutes to 9 on BBC Radio Kent Breakfast with John and Maggie. Throughout the election campaign, we've been debating the issues that you've told us matter to you. This week, we've been talking about immigration a lot. Today, we're asking whether or not our county, Kent, has been better or worse off as a result of immigration. Our guests joining us are Fraser Patterson from the Dover-based charity Samfire, which supports those detained at the Dover Immigration Removal Centre while waiting for their asylum applications to be processed. Joe Costanza joins us as well. He's the director of the UK Institute for Migration Research, which is a partnership between Canterbury Christ Church University and Migrant Help. And Alp Mehmet joins us from Migration Watch, a non-political group which is concerned at the present scale of immigration in the UK. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Let's all start off then, I suppose, by talking about the general election, the run-up to this election. We've heard a lot from the politicians about immigration. Do you think that immigration should be such a hot topic in the run-up to the general election? Let's go first of all to Joe Costanza from the UK Institute for Immigration. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. So my first comment basically would be this is certainly an important issue for whether it's for Kent, for the South East or across the UK. The population, not only internal to the UK in terms of the population who's been here for a very long time, born and raised here, but also those who come in, has been moving in and out of the country, and the numbers have been growing. So certainly that is something for local decision makers, local populations and communities to be talking about, as well as politicians.
Okay, over to Alp Mehmet from Migration Watch. Should we be talking about it as much in the general election as we have been?
Well, frankly, we haven't been talking about it enough, I don't think.
You don't think?
You have, and I've found going around the country that in the regions, there's been lots of talk about it. But if you look at the actual parties and what they said they were going to talk about, immigration was omitted, both by Labour and by the Conservatives. And the Lib Dems, frankly, have never really wanted to talk about it. So I think that that's prompted stations like yours to focus on it, because your listeners have said, we want to talk about this issue.
But it is in all of their manifestos. It is all in their policies, isn't it?
Well, the 6 points that the Tories were going to focus on didn't actually include immigration, and the Labour candidates were told, move on, don't talk about it too much. So, yeah, I think that it could have been centre stage much more than it has been nationally. OK,
Fraser Patterson in the studio with us here in Tunbridge Wells. What do you think? Have you heard enough from the politicians? Have you heard too much? What have you heard?
I mean, I think that we've been hearing an awful lot about immigration, and I think one point to remember is the talk of immigration, and a lot of the policies that have already been put in place have a big cost that I think has been hidden from people, and I think that's the point of immigration that needs to be talked of more. The cost to our communities and the cost to keeping communities cohesive and integrated, that isn't talked about enough.
Are you talking about financial costs?
No, what I'm talking about is when you have what are anti-immigration policies that have already been in place for several years, those have a big cost to our society in excluding communities and making people feel less British and feeling less involved in our communities in Kent.
Okay, what exactly do you mean by that? Like, explain what you mean. When you talk to people, what do they say to you? Do they say that the immigration has had an effect on them?
Well, I think one important point is when you talk about cutting numbers in immigration, that has a very human cost. You know, if you put a limit on, like we've had, minimum income in order to join up with your family, for example, in order to for a husband or wife to come to the country, when people aren't able to meet that, that is a split family, and that is a big human cost. And in the same way, when our legal aid budget has been slashed massively, the thing is people aren't able to enforce their rights, and the rules in place aren't able to be enforced by immigrants, and that means that a lot of communities lose trust in our systems.
Okay, Joe Costanza, I'm wondering, would you resonate with that if things are cut, if budgets are cut, etc., we can't help people that need help, maybe that want to come and live in Britain enough as much as maybe we'd like to?
Certainly. I think one of the points I would make, and just following up on the other two guests' comments, is the real lack of what I would call evidence-based research or evidence-based explanations. That's not only by the politicians, but in our own kind of understanding of what is the impact of migration locally. We need better research. We need more research. And despite the fact that migration has shared an incredible amount of attention leading up to the general election, it's still there's a still incredible need for information at the local level. And that's something that our institute is trying to do.
Alp, what do you think about the numbers that we're told about, the facts and the figures? Do you think people are actually aware of the numbers of immigrants that are in this country and indeed in Kent?
Well, people's perceptions are their perceptions, and you can't simply brush it out aside and say, sorry, but you're wrong. It's not nearly as many as you think it is. We're talking about human beings, and they react to certain circumstances. Immigration is one of those areas that touches our lives in just about every sphere, be it schools, be it housing, be it our health sector. So you can't simply ignore it. Most people in this country would like to see lower immigration. We're not talking about stopping it. We're not talking about not giving asylum to those who qualify for asylum. We're talking about bringing numbers down from the present massive scale. We're talking about mass immigration here. We're not talking about ordinary immigration. I want to help those coming in settle, integrate. The huge numbers that are coming in at the moment makes that very, very difficult.
Joe, do you think there's huge numbers coming in at the moment? Is that what you think?
Well, I think actually in just looking in Kent and the southeast in particular, the largest source of migration, of course works in two directions, people coming in and going out, but most of the migration into Kent, into the southeast right now, comes from other parts of the UK. It's not necessarily coming from overseas. And the most recent data we have, which is from the Office for National Statistics, says that basically 7 out of 10 people in terms of that incoming migration are coming from London, from other parts of the southeast into Kent. And so I think we need to kind of make sure we're clear on what we mean by migration and also these kinds of issues about impact.
Actually, Joe, I'm sorry to disagree with you, but it's not that at all. In the 10 years between 2001 and 2011, in the southeast alone, foreign-born population went up by about 80%, 85%. And the black and minority ethnic community rose by something like 50% in places around Kent. In Dartford, it was 160%. In Dover, it was 140%. Now, these in themselves may be relatively small numbers, but that sort of speed at which it's increasing has an impact.
OK, let me just hold you there for a moment because we must take a break for the news. We'll get back to talking about figures, the figures we know about, the figures we think we know about very shortly. But first of all, let's get the latest news, weather, travel and sport now with Rose. This is BBC Radio Kent. It's 20 to 9.
A Kent hospital trust and a doctor will appear in court today charged with manslaughter after a primary school teacher died giving birth by emergency caesarean section. Francis Cappuccini died at Tunbridge Wells Hospital in October 2012.